Ambassador, I'd like to talk about textiles for a few minutes if we can. One of the members of the TPP, assuming it goes through, will be Vietnam, one of our major textile trading partners. As most folks know, it's not an open economy. It would be different than some of the other members, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, in that fashion. It's a government that it still has a lot of state-owned enterprises, a government that still manipulates its currency. What is the USTR going to be doing as part of the TPP to protect our businesses domestically generally, but also the textile industry specifically, against market manipulation by the Vietnamese government?
We're working very closely with all of our TPP partners to develop a truly 21st century trade agreement. And the obligations obviously run two ways. So we intend to hold each and every one of our partners, including Vietnam, to the highest standards that we succeed in negotiating. And that goes for the range of issues, whether we're talking about goods or non-tariff barriers or state-owned enterprises, which is a very important topic, I think, related to your question, in terms of agreeing on some basic rules of the road. So with respect, for example, to state-owned enterprises, it's not that countries can't have them, but that we have a common understanding of how they operate when it comes to international trade so that they don't disadvantage business. So this is a really key piece of the TPP effort that we are undertaking. But our goals for TPP, as you know, are very ambitious. We've been consulting closely with members of Congress. I believe we've had several hundred consultations at least, and we intend to have many more, because this is an issue, including in particular on textiles, where our stakeholders have clear interests, and we want to do our very best to be responsive to those interests as we all work together to forge what we hope will be a very ambitious 21st century agreement. Specifically,
because Vietnam is a non-market economy, are you all looking at extended phase-out or phase-down provisions for textile tariffs?
It's hard to speak publicly about specific negotiating objectives, but we would be very happy to brief you and your staff in more detail.
Well, let me ask a question that hopefully you can answer publicly, which we've heard back home, that the Vietnamese negotiators have taken a fairly hard line on this and said that they don't want any restrictions on textile exports in the United States, and that if there are any, it'll be a non-starter for them for the rest of the negotiations. Can you comment on that?
Well, I can say that there's often a lot of posturing in public about trade negotiations, not just with respect to TPP, but across the board. What I will say and promise you is that Ambassador Kirk and I and the whole team are committed to vigorously defending U.S. interests, both with respect to the negotiation of trade agreements and then, of course, with respect to their enforcement, so that everybody lives by the rules, as I mentioned earlier, to which they have agreed. That is a critical, critical piece of what we believe is a robust trade agenda.
And as part of our previous robust trade agendas that we have with various countries and various other regions, we have a fairly traditional, a fairly standard yarn forward rule. Are you familiar with what that is? Mm-hmm. Is it currently the USTR's position that they'll be pushing that same rule as part of the TPP, or have you decided to change your position on that?
Well, I'm not going to speak for our chief textile negotiator, who's been down in Dallas working this issue, but I do believe that that is an important component of what our general policy is. So I'd be happy if you'd like to take a question for the record and get back to you with a specific answer if that's useful.
That'd be great. Anything you could do, and I recognize you can't do everything publicly here. I know how negotiating works. Let me ask one question, though, that I do get from folks back home, which is, what's the schedule? It seems so often that textiles, for example, sort of go to the very end of the line, and they're negotiated in the last couple of days and weeks before there's a deadline approaching. What's the schedule for the overall negotiation, and where do textiles fit in that timeline?
Well, the schedule is that President Obama and other TPP leaders have asked the negotiators to wrap up their work by the end of this year. And they did that last November. So we've been on an accelerated schedule ever since.
End of this calendar year?
This calendar year,
okay.
Correct. 2012. And so, as I mentioned, Dallas is the 12th round. We've also had some informal intersessional rounds so we can get our work done. We're scheduling several additional rounds this year with the goal of trying to wrap this up. As you know, sometimes the most difficult issues are those that end up being worked at the end. But at the same time, each round we are making progress, in our view, on the textile issue as well as all the other issues. It's a 25-chapter, roughly, agreement, and so the textiles are a critical piece, and other stakeholders have interest in other chapters. So we're really trying to push everything as much as we can in favor of our interests.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I'll just close by saying that I recognize it's 25 chapters, Mr. Chairman. It always struck me that free trade agreements could be written on one page, which is you lower your tariffs, we'll lower ours, and we'll just go and compete. It's a shame that we get into these documents that would make the health care bill look simple, for example. But I appreciate you coming today, and yield back the balance of my time.